This is Shirley from Shirley's World. I'm in the process of doing a session of videos about growing up in the 40s and the 50s. I wanted to do this before I forget everything. I have written in my journal about 7 pages of items, so I'm taking some notes on certain things and going to tell you about them. Our parents grew up during the Depression. The Great Depression was 1929 to 1941. The year before I was born, it ended. World War II was from 1935 to 1945. So I was born while World War II was still going on. Now, my parents lived through the Great Depression, so they were very frugal. People that lived during the Great Depression had trouble spending money, I think, afterwards. I think they really were careful with their money for a long time. But World War II is what really broke the Depression because all these jobs opened up for wartime. They needed wartime things. So that's what cured the Great Depression. I'd hate to think that you have to have a big world war to stop a depression, but I think that's what happened. It created millions of jobs, and that's what did it. I was born, like I said, in 1942 during wartime, and we had a family of 4. My mother, my father, and they had 2 daughters. 2 daughters were born during World War II. So my father did not have to go to the war. And my parents were married in 41. My parents met on a blind date. My parents, it was my mother's best friend, Hannah, that introduced them. And things obviously worked out, and they got married in 1941, and they bought a house that we lived in our entire life. I think I put that in the thumbnail, our house on Elmwood Avenue. It was a little bungalow. It had 2 bedrooms at the time, had 2 bedrooms and 1 bath. It had a kitchen, a dining room, and a living room. It had a very small lot, but it did have a backyard. There was no garage. It had a backyard with the picket fence that surrounded about half of the yard. The other yard was a wire fence. Yeah. I remember mostly about the backyard. I even remember the hills and valleys. It wasn't perfectly straight, of course. I can remember the bumps and I can just remember that backyard so well. My mother planted a garden all the way around, flowers. We didn't have vegetables in that garden. And the people that lived next door were an older Italian couple, I think at the time. Maybe not. Maybe I'm remembering that wrong. I'll have to go to my sister for that. That might have been later. I think we had neighbors next to us that had 2 kids because they were our friends back when we were younger. So I think that's how it was. So this is how it's going to be when I'm trying to remember stories. But I'm trying to tell you the basic things of our family first. There was 4 of us. We also had a dog. We had a cat, or 2 or 3. And we had a parakeet at some point. A parakeet named Chico. And yeah, our cats, we had 2 cats at one time. And they both had kittens at the same time, because back then I don't think hardly anybody got their cats or dogs spayed or neutered. So our cats had kittens at the same time. We had kittens all over the place. I think there were 14 or 16 kittens at one time in our house, and we had to find homes for them. Yeah. We never took our kittens, or, well, our dogs didn't have puppies, but we never took our kittens to the pound at all. We found homes for them. My father had 3 brothers and 1 sister. His brothers were one owned a gas station, one kept on the family farm, stayed on the family farm, and one was wealthy and owned a rubber factory in, I think it started in Logansport, Indiana, maybe, and then it moved to Dyersburg, Tennessee, and I think that rubber factory, it's called the Colonial Rubber Works. I think it's still there, actually. My Uncle Willard owned that, Willard Wickersham. Wickersham was our last name, very English. And yeah, so the farm, it was mostly an apple orchard. I think there was about 100 acres. That was the farm that my father grew up on, that my grandma Wickersham and her husband at the time, Joseph, owned and had these kids, 5 kids. My father's sister, Helen, grew up to be a nurse, an RN, and she met her husband, who is a surgeon, or was a surgeon. Everybody's passed on now, but the Uncle John Drake was a surgeon, and we would go down to visit at their house. It was a beautiful house in Mount Vernon, Ohio. But that's, I remember a lot about their house too. When we went to visit them, their house had 3 floors, actually. Not even counting the basement, which was completely finished. Had a living room with a gigantic fireplace. And then the second floor where the bedrooms were, and then had a 3rd floor where there were a couple rooms up there. One of my cousins had her bedroom up there. So I never knew of a house with 3 floors before that. They had a maid. I have to ask my sister, because right now I can't remember her name, but they had a maid, a cook. Yeah, who was so nice. But anyway, I'm getting off track already. See, that's how this is going to go. Okay, our mother, during that time of the 40s and early 50s when we were growing up, women stayed home. They stayed home and they raised their family at home. My father worked in 2 different places that I remember. He worked for the Talon Zipper Company in the factory. He was a factory worker. And after that, he worked in the Erie Foundry, which he ran a great big, some sort of machine. It was huge. I mean, it was called a planer, I think. But it was a huge machine he ran. But I think he retired from the Erie Foundry when he retired. Men back then worked for companies for years and years and years, unlike now. They would get a retirement watch when they retired. I have my father's watch that he got when he retired. Yeah, and they got a pension. So that's all gone pretty much now, I think. My mother, like I said, stayed home, and she always wore dresses. I remember that. She always wore a dress, never pants. I don't think women wore pants, except maybe during wartime, when they were helped in the war or in the factories back then. But my mother always wore a dress, and she'd always get a little spruced up before my father was home, got home from work. She'd put a little lipstick on and got a little spruced up. But my mother, she washed clothes on Mondays. She ironed on Tuesday, and believe me, she ironed everything. She sprinkled. Now, they didn't have, she hung her clothes out to dry. And in the wintertime, she hung them down in the basement to dry. They didn't have a dryer at that point. I think they had a washing machine when we were really little. I'm not sure what type they had back then, but I remember she hung her clothes to dry, and then when she'd bring them in, she'd sprinkle them to make them damp and roll them in a roll and lay them at the end of the ironing board so they'd be damp for when she ironed. And then they got really nice and neat when she ironed. She ironed everything. She even ironed my father's boxer shorts. She ironed sheets. She ironed everything. I don't know. Maybe she taught me to iron. I've always liked to iron, and I iron a lot of things. I'd much rather iron than steam things. I'm not very good at steaming without burning myself. Yeah, so on Tuesday she'd iron. I'm not sure what Wednesdays were, but on Thursdays, and I didn't remember this, but my sister said it was Thursdays, when we were old enough to go shopping with them, we went shopping, and my mother she'd look up the ads in the newspaper, and she would go shopping with her two sisters. Oh, I forgot to tell you, my mother had two sisters. My mother's name was Dorothy, and her two sisters, her older sister was Ada, my Aunt Ada, and her younger sister was my Aunt Betty. And the three of them would go grocery shopping together. And sometimes Ada drove, which she was fine at driving, but sometimes my Aunt Betty would drive. And her car had a clutch. Well, I think Aunt Ada's did too, but Aunt Ada could work it better than my Aunt Betty. My Aunt Betty, we were always jerking forward and jerking backwards. It was hilarious. We were always in the back seat, the kids, laughing of how my Aunt Betty drove. But we would go grocery shopping, and very careful at getting things at the lowest price possible back then. Just like now, I suppose. Yeah, so let me see my father worked, like I said, 5 days a week. He would come home from work about 5 o'clock, I think it was. In the morning, my mother would pack him a lunch. He always carried his lunch to work at both places, and he had a black lunch pail, black lunch bucket. I remember exactly what it looked like. Had a rounded top, and he carried a thermos with coffee in it, and she would make his lunch every day they'd take to work. He would get home about 5 o'clock, and back then, I think a lot of people did this. Everybody ate supper together as a family. we ate at the kitchen table. We only used the dining room table when we had company or it was a holiday. It was some big meal. But we ate at the kitchen table, the four of us. And I remember when we were little, we had very small meals. I'll talk about the food in another one of these, but yeah, on the weekends now, we also ate breakfast together when my father was home. So I always remember having orange juice for sure in the morning for breakfast. My father, though, liked to have grapefruit. I never liked grapefruit. It's too sour. But he'd sprinkle powdered sugar on the top. Yeah, he also liked cantaloupe. Yeah, those are the two things my father would sometimes have for breakfast. So our family, like most families back then that we knew anyway, they were a family unit. It was always the mother and the father and the children. Sometimes it was a small family, sometimes it was a great big family. But yeah, the family was the unit that held everybody together, that held, I think they held America together. So I'm going to close for that now, and I will continue with my stories in session 2. So I hope you're enjoying these. I don't want to edit these too much, so you'll see me stumbling around a lot, but I don't want to keep editing because that's what takes so long to get these out. And I thought I had 5 pages here, but I seem to have, nope, there's another one. Just a minute. See, this would normally be edited out, but I'm not going to edit it out. Oh, I wanted to tell you about our house. Our bungalow that they bought when they first got married, it cost under $3,500. $3,500, under that. Now, my Aunt Betty, when they bought their house, it was in a wealthier neighborhood. I'm not sure why. My Uncle Merle, I'm not sure what he did for a living. I think he owned it. I'll have to ask my sister on that too. But anyway, their house cost $10,000, and my parents thought that was outrageous to pay for a house back then, just to give you an idea. But our house, even though it was $3,500, it had a mortgage. And I remember when I was a little older, 5, 6 years old, my father would take me with him to go pay the mortgage, and it was just a few blocks away, and it was at a house. So another man, another family had owned that house, and my parents bought the house off of them because that's who they were paying the mortgage to. So yeah, they lived there, and they lived in that bungalow their entire married life. And that's where they died from. Yeah, my sister and I lived there till we went off to college. And we always went back to visit there. And it was our home. So I'm going to close for now. And I will start the next series maybe next week. But I hope you're enjoying these. If you have any ideas of things I should include, for sure, let me know in the comments. And please subscribe to my channel. Like I said in the first one, I'm trying to build up my YouTube channel. Yeah, it's not as easy as you think. So, yeah, please subscribe and share. And give me a thumbs up if you're enjoying these. So I will be back soon with the next one. Bye.